Welcome back, everyone. Diving back into Atul Suhash's case, the Bengaluru Techie, who, well, he died by suicide. It's heavy stuff.
Mm.
That 80-minute video, that 24-page note, it's chilling.
It is. It is. And last time we were looking at, the accusations he made against his wife and her family and all those demands for a settlement, remember?
Right, right. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. And, it really got people thinking about men's rights in marriage, and just how complicated the whole legal system can be in India.
Totally. And today we're kind of adding another layer to all of this, right? We're going to look at the case of Rishi Trivedi, another suicide. And it's got some pretty disturbing similarities to Atul's story.
It does. And we're going to, take a look at some of the data, some of the legal framework, see if there's maybe a bigger problem here.
Yeah, for sure.
What's really interesting to me is how people are reacting online to these cases. There's this growing movement, asking some pretty tough questions about whether Indian laws are really biased against men, especially when it comes to marriage.
That's a big question. So for anyone who's just joining us, can you give us a quick recap of what happened to Atul Suhash and what were the main accusations he made?
Okay, so Atul Suhash, he was found dead in his Bengaluru apartment back on December 9th, 2024. And he was a deputy general manager at a pretty well-known automobile firm, just 34 years old.
Wow.
And before he died, he recorded this video. It was 80 minutes long. And then he wrote this suicide note, 24 pages. And in both of these, he's accusing his wife, her name's Nikita Singhania, her mother, her brother, and her uncle of just harassing him relentlessly. Yeah, and he's claiming that they were demanding this huge settlement, 3 crore rupees, to drop all these legal cases they had filed against him. And these cases, they included accusations of murder, dowry harassment, even unnatural sex.
That's insane. And wasn't there something about a judge? Some allegations of corruption.
Oh, yeah. Atul claimed that this family court judge in Uttar Pradesh, which is where he was originally from, that this judge was siding with his in-laws and even asking for bribes.
No way.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder, right? Even when you have laws in place to protect people, what happens when the people who are supposed to uphold those laws are allegedly corrupt?
It's terrifying, really. And then there was that whole thing about his wife booking that paying guest accommodation.
Oh, yeah, in Gurugram.
Yeah, just a day before Atul died. She paid a whole month's rent, but she never stayed there. Any updates on that?
That's a detail that still has investigators scratching their heads. It definitely adds another layer of weirdness to this whole tragic situation.
Yeah, totally. So how does Rishi Trivedi fit into all of this? I mean, at first glance, it just seems like another awful suicide, but is there something more?
Well, Rishi Trivedi, he was also from Uttar Pradesh, and he took his own life on December 27th, 2023.
Okay.
And his family, they claim that his wife, Shikha Awasthi, she's emotionally abusing him. Rishi's brother, Amji, he's been pretty outspoken about it online, sharing all these details, and it paints a really grim picture, relentless emotional cruelty.
What kind of details are we talking about here?
Well, Amji said that Rishi was working as a taxi driver. He was working his tail off 12, 14 hours every day trying to meet his wife's demands. But instead of being grateful, Shika was constantly putting him down, humiliating him. Amji even said that she told him to die multiple times.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
It is. It really is. And it sounds like the harassment didn't even end after Rishi died.
No, it's awful. Amji claims that after Rishi's death, Shika actually demanded 5 lakh rupees from their family. And she even threatened to stop them from performing his last rites if they didn't pay up. Yeah. It's just unimaginable the pain that would put on a family who's already grieving.
I can't even imagine. So both Atul and Rishi died by suicide, and both after alleged abuse from their wives. But it seems like their cases are being handled very differently. Atul's wife and her family were arrested, but there's been no action taken against Shikha Awasthi.
You're right. The Bengaluru police, they arrested Nikita Singhania, her mother, and her brother for abetment of suicide in Atul's case, and they're currently in judicial custody. But in Rishi's case, even though his family has filed complaints, there hasn't been an FIR filed against Shikawawasi. An FIR, that's a first information report. It's the first step to starting a police investigation.
Right.
And this has really sparked outrage online. There are these hashtags, hashtag justice for Rishi, hashtag arrest Shikawawasi. They're gaining a lot NCRB.
It sounds like there's a lot of anger out there, a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
And it gets even more intense when you consider the bigger picture.
Yeah.
The 2022 NCRB report on suicides in India, it had some pretty disturbing statistics, right?
It did. That report, it said that there were over 170,000 suicides reported in India in 2022. But what's really shocking is the ratio of men to women. It was 71.8 to 28.2.
Whoa.
Yeah, that means way more men died by suicide than women.
That's a huge difference. Didn't the report also talk about which age group was most affected and the main reasons why people took their own lives?
Yeah, the report said that people between 18 and 30 years old, they were the most vulnerable to suicide. And the top two causes across all genders, they were family problems and illness.
Wow.
And when you connect this data back to Atul and Rishi's cases, it really makes you think.
It does. I mean, are we even paying attention to what men are going through, especially within their families? These cases, and then the data from the NCRB, it seems like there's a bigger issue here, a bigger problem that we need to address.
Yeah, it's a question that's being asked more and more these days. There's the sense that, we have laws and support systems for women, which is important, but there might be a gap when it comes to men, when it comes to recognizing and addressing the things they struggle with, especially within marriage.
So let's talk about the laws in India. Like, how are men protected when they're married? Especially when it comes to, domestic violence, harassment. It seems like the laws are mostly focused on protecting women.
You're right. It's more complicated than a lot of people realize. India has made some good progress when it comes to protecting women from domestic violence, but the legal protections for men, they're not as clear cut. I mean, the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act, it was passed in 2005. The name kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, right. Really.
But that doesn't mean men have zero legal options, right? So what can they do if they're being abused in their marriage?
Yep, can they do?
Well, there are some things in the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, that's the BNS, it's India's new criminal code. And there are some parts of it that can offer some protection to men.
Okay, so like, what are some specific examples? I'm sure our listeners would want to know, like, exactly what these legal protections are.
Sure. So there's Section 85. Now, this is mainly about protecting women from cruelty by their husbands.
Right.
But the way it's written, it can also be used by men who are being abused physically or mentally by their wives.
Oh, so it's not just for women. That's interesting.
Exactly. It's more nuanced than that. And then you have Section 217, and this lets men file what are called counter cases. So if they think they've been falsely accused of cruelty, they can use this. It gives them a way to fight back, and maybe hold those who are making false claims accountable.
That's really important, right? Especially when you think about the power dynamics in a marriage. I mean, things can get pretty messed up.
Absolutely. It recognizes that these laws, they can be misused, and there need to be ways to protect people from that.
Right.
And then there's Section 248, and this one deals with false charges of serious crimes. So if a man can prove that his wife deliberately made up a serious accusation, something like rape or dowry harassment, he can use this section to take action.
Dowry harassment it's a huge problem in India. A lot of people don't really understand what it is. Can you explain it for our listeners?
Yeah, dowry harassment is, sadly, it's still a big problem here. It's when the husband or his family, they treat the wife really badly. It can be mental, physical, all kinds of cruelty. And the goal is to extort more money or property from her family.
So basically, these sections of the BNS, they offer some kind of protection for men who might be falsely accused or stuck in situations where, the laws meant to protect women are actually being used against them.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They show that there needs to be balance in the legal system, We need to protect women, but we also need to be fair and make sure that laws aren't being misused.
Right. Makes sense. And what about alimony and maintenance? Do men have any rights in those areas? I feel like there's this idea that those things are mostly for women.
That is a common perception, yeah, but it's not entirely true. While it's true that women are more likely to use those provisions, they're not just for women. Under the Hindu Marriage Act and the BNS, men can actually ask for what's called interim maintenance during a divorce, if they can prove that they can't support themselves financially because the marriage is broken down.
So there are ways for men to get support if they're, like, financially dependent on their wives?
Yeah, there are. And there are also ways for men to get maintenance after a divorce if they're still financially dependent. So it challenges that assumption that men are always the breadwinners.
Right. It goes both ways.
It,
It seems like there's this disconnect between what the laws actually say and what people think, you know?
yeah.
Like, the laws might offer some protection to men, but people just assume that they favor women.
That's a really important point. This idea that the system is biased, whether it's true or not, it can make men afraid to come forward to ask for help when they're being abused.
Yeah, for sure.
It creates this feeling that, nobody's on their side. And that's exactly why this debate about having a national commission for men in India, it's gaining so much momentum.
National Commission for Men.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's been a hot topic lately.
Yeah.
Can you explain what this commission would be and why it's causing so much controversy?
Sure. So the idea is to have a body that's similar to the National Commission for Women. But this one would be specifically for men for the problems they face, especially in marriage and family disputes. And the people who support this commission, they say that it would give men a dedicated platform, a place where they can report abuse, get legal advice, and get help with their specific needs.
I mean, it sounds logical, right?
Yeah.
Especially with all these concerns about bias against men in the current system. But you said it's controversial. Why? Why are people against it?
Well, the main worry is that having a separate commission for men, it might backfire. Some people say that it could become political, that it could actually hurt the progress we've made in protecting women's rights. And there's this fear that it could make abusers feel more powerful and create a system where men's issues are more important than women's safety.
So it's like a delicate balancing act, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, you have this growing need to address what men are going through in their marriages and families. But on the other hand, there's this real concern that creating a separate commission could make things worse.
Exactly. It's a really complicated debate, and there are good arguments on both sides. Finding a solution that's fair for everyone, that protects everyone, it's not easy.
No, it's not. We've covered a lot today, from Atul Subhash and Rishi Trivedi's tragic stories to the data on suicides and all the legal stuff. And it's just, there's so much more to talk
They'll
about.
barely scratch the surface.
In the next part of our deep dive, we'll dig a little deeper into the things that are happening in society, in our culture, that are feeding these problems. And we'll explore those arguments for and against a national commission for men.
And we'll also look at what we can do to create a system that's fairer and more just for everyone, no matter their gender.
Yeah, that's important. But before we move on, I want to go back to Rishi Trivedi's case for a second. We talked about the emotional abuse allegations, but did his family share any specific incidents or details that really show what he was going through?
Yeah, they did. And some of the things Amji shared they're really disturbing. He said that Shika, she constantly belittled Rishi, compared him to her brother. She made fun of his job, said it was beneath her family. And she would constantly compare his income and status to her brother's, saying he was better.
God.
It's just cruel, and it shows how damaging emotional abuse can be. It's just as bad as physical violence. Words can really hurt. And when you constantly tear someone down, it can have terrible consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. Amji also mentioned something about Shika filing false cases against their family after Rishi died.
He did. That's another layer of just awfulness in this whole situation.
Right.
Back in February 2024, Shika, she filed cases against Rishi's family in Auraya, Uttar Pradesh. She accused them of domestic violence and dowry harassment.
But Rishi was the one who died by suicide. How can she accuse his family of that after he's gone?
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's a move that has a lot of people confused and angry. Amji says that these cases are totally baseless. He says it's just Shika's way of torturing their family even more. And he says that she's specifically going after their 65-year-old father with these legal actions, just piling on more pain.
It's just awful.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that point we were making before about how these laws can be misused, right?
Yeah.
And how we need to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, definitely. It shows that we need to investigate these cases thoroughly and make sure the law is applied fairly. We have to make sure that the laws meant to protect people aren't being used to hurt them instead.
Yeah, that's so important. So we have these two cases, Atul Subhash and Rishi Trivedi, both of them alleging abuse by their wives, both ending in suicide. But their stories, they're just the beginning, right?
Sure. Oh, absolutely. They're just the tip of the iceberg. They show us a much bigger problem that we as a society need to deal with. These cases, and the data from the NCRB, they force us to face this uncomfortable truth that men can be victims of abuse too. And the systems we have in place, the support we offer, it might not be enough for them.
It's a really complicated and sensitive issue, but we have to talk about it. We have to do something.
We do. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll look more into the things happening in society and our culture that contribute to these problems.
And we'll talk more about the laws in India and whether or not they're fair to men.
We'll also talk about the pros and cons of having a national commission for men.
It can be a lot to cover.
It is. But for now, I want to leave you with this thought. These aren't just isolated incidents. These are real people, real lives that have been affected by a system that might not always be fair or just. And the question is, what can we do? What can we do as individuals, as a society, to make sure that everyone, no matter their gender, can get support and justice when they need it most? That's something to think about. It's something we all need to keep thinking about. You know, these cases, they're really unsettling. They really make you question everything you thought you knew about domestic abuse, about how the legal system handles it. You know, it's like you're looking at something familiar, but then suddenly you see all these details you never noticed before.
It's almost like we're peeling back these layers of this story that we've all accepted for so long.
Yeah.
You know, we automatically think of domestic abuse as violence against women.
Right.
And while that's obviously a huge problem, it's like we've forgotten that men can be victims too.
It's like that thing, what do they call it? Confirmation bias.
Yep.
You know, we tend to filter information based on what we already believe, even if the evidence says something different.
So how do we get past that? How do we step back and see the whole picture?
Mm-hmm.
How do we acknowledge that everyone, men and women, can suffer from abuse?
I think it starts with education, with awareness. We need to have these open, honest conversations about the different ways abuse can happen. You know, we need to acknowledge that it can affect anyone, no matter their gender.
And it's not just about recognizing that men can be victims.
Right.
It's about understanding how hard it is for them to ask for help or even admit that they need it.
Absolutely. Men, they face this huge pressure from society to be strong, to be stoic, to be the provider, the protector. And that can make it almost impossible for them to admit that they're vulnerable, to ask for help when they're being abused, especially if it's not physical abuse, if it's emotional, psychological.
It's like they're stuck.
Yeah.
If they say something, they might be ridiculed. People might not believe them. But if they stay silent, they just suffer alone.
Exactly. And then there's the fear that even if they do speak up, they won't be taken seriously by the police, by the courts.
Yeah.
There's this perception, right or wrong, that the system is biased against men in these kinds of cases.
And then you have cases like Atul's, where, you know, he actually said in his suicide note that he felt like the system failed him. He felt like it was working against him, not for him.
Yeah, his words they're a powerful reminder of how real this perception is. And then you have cases like Rishi Trivedi's where, despite his family's complaints, despite those disturbing allegations, there's been no real action taken against his wife.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
The perceived bias stops men from coming forward, which means the problem stays hidden.
Yeah.
And then nobody understands it. Nobody's aware of it.
You got it. And that cycle, it creates this environment where abusers can just keep doing what they're doing, no consequences.
So how do we break the cycle? How do we as a society create a system that's fair and just for everyone who's being abused, no matter their gender?
I think we need to fundamentally change the way we think about this issue. We need to stop thinking about it as us versus them. You know, recognizing that one gender suffers doesn't mean the other doesn't.
It's not men against women. It's about recognizing that abuse is abuse, plain and simple. It doesn't discriminate, and neither should our compassion, our pursuit of justice.
Exactly. And that means being willing to challenge our own biases, to really listen to what other people are going through with empathy, with an open mind.
And we need to make sure that our laws, our support systems, are truly gender neutral. Everyone deserves equal protection under the law. Everyone deserves the same chances to seek justice.
You're right. We can't just talk about equality. We need to look at how these laws are actually being used. Are they being applied fairly? Are they addressing the unique challenges that men face? These are the questions we need to ask.
We've talked about this idea of having a national commission for men in India.
Yeah.
Do you think that would actually help?
It's a tough one. There are valid concerns about it being misused, about it actually hurting women's rights. But but I do think it's worth considering. If we have the right safeguards, it could be a really valuable tool for helping male victims.
Okay, so what kind of safeguards are we talking about? What needs to be in place for this commission to actually work, to be ethical?
Well, first of all, it needs to be completely independent, impartial, no political influence, no patriarchal agendas.
Right.
And it needs to be staffed with people who really understand domestic abuse, men's mental health, legal advocacy, all of that.
And the whole process, how complaints are received, how they're investigated, how victims are supported, it all needs to be transparent, accountable.
Absolutely. Transparency and accountability, those are key.
Right.
We need to know that the commission is actually working for the people it's supposed to help. And it needs to collaborate with organizations that support women. We can't let efforts to help men come at the expense of women's safety and rights.
So it's all about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Protecting everyone, making sure everyone has equal rights.
Exactly. It's tricky, but it requires understanding, careful thought, and a real commitment to fairness and justice for everyone.
And it requires us to move past those simple narratives that pit men and women against each other. We need to understand that this isn't a zero-sum game.
Couldn't agree more. We're all in this together. We all want a society where everyone feels safe, respected, where abuse is just not tolerated.
It's about building a culture of empathy, understanding, and support for every victim, regardless of their gender.
And that's a goal worth fighting for, don't you think?
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about how society views this, about the laws, about the possibility of a national commission for men. But what about on a more personal level? What can we do as individuals, as friends, as family members, as members of a community to support people who might be experiencing abuse?
That's a great question. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, but sometimes the most important changes start with how we treat each other. The support we give to the people around us, it can make a huge difference.
So give us some practical advice. What can we actually do?
Well, first, we need to be aware of the signs of abuse. We often focus on physical signs, but remember, emotional and psychological abuse, they can be just as damaging.
So what should we be looking for? How can we tell if someone we care about is in trouble?
There are lots of subtle signs, but some common ones are, isolation, withdrawing from social activities, sudden changes in their mood, low self-esteem, being really afraid or anxious around their partner.
And if we think someone is being abused, how do we approach them? It's a sensitive situation. We don't want to make it worse.
You're right. It's about being empathetic, not judging them. Just let them know that you're there, that you believe them, and that you want to help in any way you can.
So creating a safe space for them to open up without pressure, without shame.
Exactly. And remember, you're not a therapist, you're not a counselor, you're not there to fix their problems. You're there to listen, to offer support, to help them find resources if they need them.
Like what kind of resources?
Well, it could be something as simple as helping them find a domestic violence hotline, a therapist, or maybe helping them find a support group where they can connect with other people who've been through the same thing, or maybe even going with them to legal appointments or court hearings if they need someone there.
So just being a reliable friend.
Yeah.
Someone they can count on when things are tough.
Exactly. And remember, respect their choices.
Right.
Let them make their own decisions, even if you don't agree with them.
It's their journey.
Yeah.
We're just there to support them, not tell them what to do.
Sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen, let them know that what they're going through is real, and remind them that they're not alone.
That's a good point. It reminds us that even with these huge, complicated problems, what we do as individuals, it can make a difference.
And those little acts of kindness, of support, they can spread.
Yeah.
They can help create a more compassionate and just world for everyone.
I like that. Okay, so we've talked about a lot in this segment, revisiting those tragic cases, the complexities of abuse, the laws in India, the idea of a national commission for men.
We talked about how important individual actions are and how important it is for society to be aware of these problems. And of course, we can't forget about protecting children from the terrible effects of abuse. It's been a tough conversation, but a really important one.
It really has. And it's a conversation that needs to keep going.
Yeah.
These aren't easy problems to solve, but they need our attention, our empathy, and our action.
Absolutely. In our last segment, we'll shift gears a bit. We'll look at the bigger picture, the evolving conversation about men's rights in India, and explore what we can do to create a society that's more fair and just for everyone.
We'll look at the things in our culture and society that shape gender roles and power dynamics in marriage. And we'll go deeper into the debate about how to best balance the rights and protections of both men and women.
But But before we do that, there's one more thing I want to share about Abdul Sukash's case, what came out during the investigation.
Oh, this is getting more and more interesting. What is it?
It turns out that Atul's wife, Nikita Singhania, she wasn't just booking that paying guest accommodation in Gurugram the day before he died.
Okay. What else was she doing?
The investigators found out that she was also at a car dealership.
Car dealership?
Yeah, she was looking at expensive cars, even took one for a test drive. She was shopping for a new car.
A new car? That's strange. Especially considering what was happening.
It's hard to understand, right? It just adds another layer of mystery to this whole case.
It makes you wonder what was going on in her head. It doesn't make sense.
It definitely raises questions about her motives, what she was thinking at the time.
It's unsettling. It feels like there's more to this story than we know.
Yeah.
Like we're only seeing a small part of something much bigger.
Exactly. And that's what we'll explore in our last segment. We'll look at the bigger picture, the things in society that lead to these tragic situations.
Yeah, it really makes you think, doesn't it, about what people are capable of, especially when, desperation, greed, maybe even a complete lack of empathy gets involved.
It's like these cases, Atul's and Rishi's, they're like cracks in the surface. They're showing us that there are deeper problems in our society. We need to look beyond the individual stories and try to understand the bigger picture, right?
Absolutely. These cracks, they run along fault lines that have been there for a long time. Things like, those rigid gender roles, power imbalances between men and women, and cultural norms that are just so deeply ingrained in our society. It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, let's talk about that broader context for a bit.
Yeah.
What are some of those societal and cultural things that might be contributing to these issues surrounding men's rights in marriage and this perception that the legal system is somehow biased against them? Well, I mean, India has this long history of patriarchy, right? Where men have traditionally held all the power, all the authority, both in families and in society as a whole. But that's changing,
Yeah, you see more and more women getting educated, becoming financially independent, standing for their rights.
Yeah.
It's a good thing, but it's definitely shaking things up.
Exactly. And these changes, they're creating tension, conflict. They're challenging those old ideas of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman.
And some men might feel threatened by this change, like they're losing the control, the status they once had.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I get it. Change can be scary, especially when it disrupts beliefs and power structures that have been around for generations. It's unsettling.
But that's still no excuse for abuse or violence.
Absolutely not.
No.
We need to remember that healthy relationships, whether it's between partners or within families, they're built on respect, on equality, on open communication.
It's about adapting to these new dynamics, finding new ways to define masculinity that aren't based on dominance or control.
Right, right. There are so many positive ways to be a man in today's world. Ways that embrace empathy, vulnerability, being a true partner.
And we also need to talk about the legal side of this.
Yeah.
There's this growing feeling, especially after these cases, that the laws meant to protect women are being used against men to make false accusations.
Yeah, that's a real concern. And while these laws have good intentions, there's always the possibility that they could be misused.
And that risk is even bigger in a society where there might already be biases against men in legal cases.
It's a complicated situation, no doubt. But I think balance is key here.
So what does that look like, a balanced approach in this context?
Okay, we need to make sure that the laws that protect women are strong, that they actually work. But at the same time, we need to protect men from false accusations. They need to have legal options if they're wrongly accused.
So finding that middle ground, right, protecting the vulnerable while also making sure everyone gets a fair chance, due process, all of that.
Exactly. And that means taking a hard look at the laws we have now. Do they have loopholes? Are there ways they can be misused? And then making changes to make sure that justice is truly served in every case.
And it's about making sure that the people enforcing the law, the police, the judges, they understand that false accusations can happen and that they need to investigate thoroughly and fairly.
You're right. The legal system needs to be fair, not just in theory, but in reality.
So where do we go from here? What can we do as individuals, as a society, to make things better, to create a system that's more just and equitable for everyone?
It's a big challenge. It's going to take a lot of work, legal reforms, social awareness campaigns, educational initiatives. We need to tackle this from all sides.
Can you explain what those things would involve, like specifically?
Okay, so on the legal side, we need to really examine the laws we have now. We need to make sure they're gender neutral, that they protect all victims of abuse, and that they have strong protections against being misused.
And everyone needs to be involved in this review, right?
Yeah.
Legal experts, men's rights activists, women's rights groups, everyone who has a stake in this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about bringing everyone together, finding a solution that works for everyone. We need to try to reach a consensus and create a system that's fair and balanced.
And how do we raise awareness in society? How do we change those deeply rooted cultural norms and stereotypes that contribute to gender inequality and create an environment where abuse is tolerated?
Well, public service announcements, education campaigns, maybe even working with influencers and celebrities, those things can help. We need to promote positive messages about healthy relationships, gender equality, respecting each other.
And we need to be having these conversations in our families, our communities, our schools. It's about creating a culture where abuse is unacceptable, where people feel safe to speak out, and where getting help is seen as a good thing, not a weakness.
You got it. This cultural shift, it has to go hand in hand with education, teaching people about gender sensitivity, empathy, how to resolve conflicts peacefully.
Right. We need to teach young people, boys and girls, about healthy relationships, about boundaries, about respecting each other.
Exactly. We need to give them the tools they need to build healthy, happy relationships.
It's not going to be easy, but it's worth it.
It is. It's an investment in a better future.
It is. And it brings us back to Atul and Rishi. Their stories show us why these conversations are so important.
They do, and they remind us that we need to work towards a future where tragedies like theirs aren't just headlines, but reminders of a past that we've learned from, a past we've moved on from.
A future where we're not talking about men's rights versus women's rights, but about human rights. About making sure that everyone has the right to live a life free from fear, violence, and abuse.
That's a great way to put it. And it's a message we need to keep sharing.
We do. We need to keep talking, keep listening, and keep working together to create a society where justice and equality are real for everyone.
Couldn't agree more. It's a fight, and it takes courage, compassion, and a lot of dedication. But it's a fight we can win if we work together.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We've explored some really tough, really complicated issues, but we hope it's given you something to think about. Maybe even inspired you to take action. Remember, change starts with each one of us.
It does, and knowledge is power. The more we understand these issues, the better we'll be at creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.